I never thought the word home could ever lose its warmth. For most people, it's just a place. Four walls, a roof, and a mortgage that quietly suffocates them. But for me, home was everything I built my earliest memories around. The smell of rain through cracked windows, the sound of my mother humming while cleaning, the faded wallpaper in the hallway with faint marks where I used to measure my height every birthday. I hadn't been back there in 12 years. Life took me elsewhere. College, jobs, long hours, people I loved and left. Time moved like a quiet thief. But no matter where I lived, that house always lived inside me. Until one day, it didn't. Because my mother sold it. And she never told me. It was early spring when I found out. I'd been living in another city for years, barely keeping in touch with her. Not out of resentment, just distance. My calls had grown shorter, her updates more practical. She'd talk about bills, groceries, the neighbor's dog, anything except herself. That morning I was scrolling through a real estate listing, not even for nostalgia, just boredom. And there it was. My childhood home. Same address, same old porch, but the windows, those weren't ours. They'd been replaced. The lawn had been trimmed into something unrecognizable. The crooked mailbox that I'd once painted blue was gone. It was listed as sold. At first I thought it couldn't be real. Maybe it was an error. Maybe someone used the address for another property. But the pictures, they were undeniable. That was my room, my mother's room, the backyard with the pear tree that never bore fruit. It had been sold 3 months ago. I remember sitting there staring at the listing for what felt like hours. It wasn't about the house itself. It was about what it meant. That a part of me had been erased without my consent. And worse, my own mother had done it. When I finally called her, she sounded tired. Not guilty, not even defensive, just indifferent. Oh, that? Yes, I sold it. It was too much to handle alone. Her voice was casual, like she was telling me she'd changed the curtains. You didn't think I'd want to know? I asked. What would it change? You live your own life now. You never come here. That silence after her words, it wasn't angry. It was heavy, like a door closing. Mom, I said quietly, that house was my childhood, and now it's someone else's. That's life. And that was it. She changed the subject, told me about her doctor's appointment. I listened, but something inside me fractured. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about how easily she'd detached from something I thought bound us together. How many years had she been planning this? Had she been waiting for a reason to erase that chapter? Had the house reminded her of something she wanted to forget? Maybe my father, or maybe me? The questions didn't hurt as much as the realization that she didn't care to answer them. I didn't speak to her for months after that. She texted occasionally, birthday wishes, forwarded messages, small things that meant nothing. I replied out of habit, not affection. But that sense of loss, it never went away. Every memory of that place turned into a sharp ache, as if the house itself had rejected me. Until one day, while driving home from work, I passed by an old neighborhood on the outskirts of my city. There was a house there that reminded me of ours. Similar architecture, same faded wood panels, and that's when the thought came to me. If she could sell it, I could buy it back.
That was the first time I realized my revenge didn't need to scream. It could whisper. And sometimes whispers last longer. A few months passed after that conversation. My mother and I barely spoke. Our relationship had become a polite exchange of updates, shallow, necessary, and completely hollow. I'd gotten used to that, but she hadn't. One evening she called unexpectedly. Her voice carried that strained politeness that only exists when guilt starts to itch beneath the skin. "I drove past the house again," she said. "It looks beautiful now." "I'm sure it does," I replied. "They changed everything, even the garden. You remember that pear tree? It's gone." There was a long pause after that. I could hear her breathing, slow, deliberate. "I don't know why it makes me sad," she continued. "I guess I thought it would always be there." I said nothing. I let the silence hang there, because sometimes silence says more than comfort ever could. Then she laughed lightly, as if to dissolve the weight of her own words. "I'm being silly," she said. "Anyway, I'm glad someone's taking care of it." I told her I had to go, and ended the call. That night, I went to the house again. I stood by the front gate, the same gate I'd walked through thousands of times as a child. It didn't squeak anymore. I'd oiled it during the renovations. The sound that once meant home was gone, replaced by a quiet, efficient click. Inside, the new tenants had settled in, a young couple with a small daughter. Their laughter echoed faintly through the walls. It wasn't my laughter. It wasn't hers either. It was pure, unaware of what this place used to hold. That was the point. I watched from the sidewalk, unseen, until the lights in the living room dimmed. Then I left. I thought that would be the end of it. Quiet revenge, complete and private. But something unexpected happened. She couldn't let it go. It started small, a question here, a passing mention there. "Do you ever wonder who owns it now? I think about it sometimes. The family living there. I hope they're happy." At first I dismissed it as nostalgia, but soon her curiosity turned to obsession. She began driving by more often. She'd mention the tiniest details, the new fence, the car in the driveway, the lights in the window. "They painted the porch gray," she said one afternoon. "I never would have thought to do that. It looks modern." Her voice had a tone I hadn't heard before, admiration mixed with unease. It was working. Without knowing it, she was falling into the quiet punishment I'd built for her, a life where the past looked at her through clean windows and no longer recognized her. Every time she spoke of it, she was reminding herself that she'd sold it, not just the walls, but the years within them. I didn't plan what came next. It just happened. One day, while checking on some paperwork with the property manager, I learned that the couple renting the house was moving out. They'd bought a new place. The house would be vacant again. I didn't hesitate. I asked the manager to keep it off the public listings for a few months. I wanted time. I've started spending evenings there again, alone. No lights, no furniture. Just me and the silence. Sometimes I'd sit in the kitchen where my mother used to read her magazines by the window. I'd make coffee in the dark, lean against the counter, and stare at nothing. There was something addictive about reclaiming the silence she once filled with small talk and sighs. Then one evening, I heard a car pull up outside. I froze. Through the window, I saw her. She got out slowly, holding a small paper bag, groceries maybe. She looked around like someone revisiting an old dream. Her hair had more gray in it now, her posture a little more fragile. She stood by the gate for a long moment, then walked toward the porch. I didn't move. I just watched from the shadows as she placed her hand on the railing, the same railing I'd sanded and repainted. Then she looked up at the house. I don't know what she expected, maybe ghosts of what she'd left behind, but what she saw instead was something perfectly unfamiliar. She knocked once, then again. No one answered, of course. After a minute, she turned and looked toward the street, maybe to make sure no one was watching, and quietly stepped onto the porch. Her footsteps echoed faintly inside as she pressed her face against the glass. I could see her lips move. She whispered something. Maybe my name, maybe not. Then she turned away, and I saw her eyes. There was no anger, no guilt, just loss. She stood there for a long time, then left. When her car disappeared down the road, I stepped outside. The night air was cold and heavy. I went to where she'd stood and touched the railing, the same spot her hand had rested. It was still warm. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just losing a house. She was losing the last place where she could pretend we were still connected. The punishment was working too well. But I didn't stop. The next week, I had the exterior repainted again, darker shades this time. Then I replaced the garden with clean stone landscaping. No trees, no flowers, just order. Every choice, every brushstroke erased her touch a little more. When she called again, her tone had changed. I drove by yesterday. It's almost unrecognizable now. I told you, Mom, you shouldn't keep going there. I know, she said. It's just strange. I keep thinking I hear your father's laugh when I drive past. I didn't respond. She paused. Do you think the people living there know anything about us? No, I said. Why would they? Right. Of course. That was the first time I heard her voice break, just slightly. It wasn't guilt. It was something worse. Recognition. She was beginning to understand that the past she'd walked away from was still alive, just not for her. A few months later, she invited me over for dinner. It had been over a year since we'd last sat at the same table. When I arrived, the house felt smaller than I remembered, cluttered, dim. She greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've lost weight," she said. Are you eating properly? I'm fine. I made your favorite, chicken with rosemary. It wasn't my favorite anymore. It hadn't been for years. But I didn't correct her. We mostly ate in silence. She talked about her neighbors, her back pain, the rising cost of groceries. I let her fill the air with small talk, pretending everything was normal. Then, near the end of the meal, she said something I didn't expect. You know, I sometimes wish I hadn't sold the house.
This wasn't about cruelty. It was about balance. She'd taken something from me without a second thought. All I did was make sure she felt the absence every single time she remembered it. The calls became less frequent, but when she reached out, her voice carried a fragile edge I hadn't heard before. It was as if every mention of the house was a tentative step into a past she couldn't reclaim. One evening, she told me she'd started keeping a journal, small notes about the neighborhood, memories, things she wished she'd said. I didn't ask to see it. I didn't want to read her grief. But in that moment, I realized the house wasn't just a building to her anymore. It was a ghost she chased, a presence she couldn't let go. Her questions grew more pointed. Do you think they'll ever let me visit? What if I just want to see the pear tree one last time? Can a place still hold memories if you're not there? I answered with silence more than words. I'd invited her to dinner once more, and this time the tension was thicker. She looked at me across the table, eyes searching for forgiveness or answers I didn't have. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said softly. Maybe you didn't know how. Maybe. Maybe, I repeated, not as a question. Our conversation drifted to the future, the things we'd never discussed before. She spoke about selling the house as if it were a necessity, but I heard something else beneath it. Fear. Regret. The weight of her own choices catching up to her. I imagine the house as a silent judge, its empty rooms watching her unravel bit by bit. One night, I drove past the house. It was quiet, dark and still. The stone garden I'd installed reflected the streetlights coldly, almost accusingly. I parked across the street, watching as shadows moved behind the curtains. I wondered if she thought of me then, or if I was just another memory she tried to bury. When I finally told her the truth, that I owned the house, her reaction was muted, almost numb. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because I wanted you to feel it," I said simply. "Feel what?" Loss. It wasn't a harsh word. It was clinical. The kind of word someone uses when dissecting a wound, not healing it. She looked away, and I knew I'd broken something. Maybe not her heart, but her certainty. The house had become a symbol of what was lost between us, but also what couldn't be reclaimed. Over time, she stopped asking to visit. She stopped driving by. And I realized that the revenge I'd crafted wasn't about her at all. It was about me taking back control of a past that was slipping through my fingers. When strangers moved in, I never met them. I never intervened. The house was no longer a battleground. It was a monument to silence. I think about the house often. About how a place can carry memories without the people who lived them. How absence can speak louder than presence. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can hear the faint echo of a child's laughter. Not mine, but someone else's. And for the first time, I wonder if that's what home truly means. Not ownership or memories, but the space for new stories to unfold. After that conversation, our call ceased almost entirely. There was nothing left to say. We had become strangers, connected only by shared history and unspoken grievances. But I knew she was still thinking about the house. The place where our lives had once intersected so completely. Now nothing more than an anonymous structure in someone else's story. Months later, I received a letter. Not from her, but from the new tenants. A simple note thanking me for the care taken with the property, mentioning how much the house had meant to them. I kept the letter on my desk. It was a reminder that while my mother's memories were gone, others were being made. Sometimes I wondered if she ever tried to visit again. If she stood outside in the cold and looked at the windows where our lives had once been so vivid. But the knowledge of that possibility never brought relief. Instead, I found a strange satisfaction in the fact that the house was alive. But not for her. That the past she so casually erased now echoed back in quiet ways.
in missing trees, changed colors, and absence. There's a peculiar weight in knowing someone you love is haunted, not by what you did, but by what you allowed to be taken away. I rebuilt that home as a sanctuary for strangers. People who brought their own lives, their own stories, and in doing so, I reclaimed a fragment of myself.